Welcome, Monish. Welcome to the CTQ Smartcast.
Thank you so much. And it's always a pleasure to be here. So it's good to be doing this more than once.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
And based on the questions that I have planned for you, there are going to be quite a few things which are going to be referring to earlier conversations that we have had. But let me start with a so-called tough one, right? So what are the 3 life lessons that you've learned from the gaming avatar of Monish?
That is a tough one, right? But I'll start with the basics. I don't know if it's a life lesson. It's definitely come very useful in life, and that is typing. One of my first games I played was, I remember, typing tutor. And you have these words coming down, and you have to type them on the keyboard before they fall down. And so you probably know the game. And that helped with my typing. I think that's a very big edge in our profession, isn't it?
Correct.
So that was definitely there. I think the second one was, and I never thought about it this way till you actually asked this question. But if you think about it, especially the games I love, like Call of Duty, you have to deal with adversity. You get shot, you get killed, and then you wake up again, come to life again, and then you come back with a vengeance. And you hate to give up. And that's taught me a lot about how to deal with adversity. I think there's another very interesting game. I never thought I would actually like a zombie game. Never played one in my life except 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. I played Last of Us, and now the remastered version came in, then the second one now. And it's been very interesting. And one of the things that I vividly remember every time I think about that game is it's a very tough situation. There's this girl and a guy is her like a father figure in her life, and they are being attacked by zombies and followed by zombies and all kinds of stuff. And then as they're going through all this mess in life, there's a nice pause in the game. Beautiful music, beautiful background. You see the animals go by. There's rains. There's a song of birds right in the middle of all this stuff that's going on. And it taught me to enjoy these small things in life, right? You need to see those animals go by, the streams flow, the leaves rustle. And I'm thankful that in all this pandemic, I think that's one thing that I've been lucky with. At least I've been able to do that. I think that's been very big.
Yeah.
And the last one, I think it's incredible when I thought about it. I think and I'm going more than 3 things, but this is probably
sure.
8, right? So it's the bonding with my kids over games like Putt and the Magic School Bus. I think that's incredible. It's a life lesson to be able to bond with your kids at that age when they were really small and that really got excited with the smallest of things. And that's why I thought it was 3A. There's a lot to learn in doing the things you love with the people you love.
Finding those common interests. And I think a big takeaway from what you just mentioned was hitting that pause button from time to time, right? Just pausing. That's very important. This question and one of the earlier smartcasts that we had done with you, Monish, we've talked about how you've actually brought lessons from other worlds, the world of gaming. We talked about how something like the open source movement, what lessons can you draw and apply them to the world of, say, organization design. So is there some way in which you actually do this, of applying lessons drawn from one area to the other? Is there some meta thinking? How should people go about this?
Yeah, I think everyone's thinking and metaphors are very different, right? You have to just find yours if you're not already. I think there's definitely a thought process behind it to make it work. That's for sure. I think it's a basic postulate that metaphors help make complex things simpler, right? And nowadays, forget about software, even personal relationships have become complex, right? So how do you bring a metaphor that helps you deal with the complexity in your life and gives your mind a way to make things simpler? And then what you see patterns. And that's any decent engineer will tell you that's the first thing to solve a really nasty bug, right? How do you make things simpler? How do you break them down? How do you break them into things that you can comprehend one thing at a time? I think that's the important thing, whether it's the open source movement, whether some of my metaphors come from, as you probably, no, not probably, you definitely know, big influence of Isaac Asimov, right? Some of these from his world, that's these. How do you find that one thing that makes a difference in a situation? There's always, in a very complex situation with a customer or a design problem or a tough relationship, it always boils down to figuring out that one thing that will make the most difference. and then making that thing happen. I think the second one also I've seen is, if you just look at, again, I'll draw from Isaac Asimov. There's a character there called Golan Trevize, and he's appointed by or elected by some powerful people to take a decision that will affect the life of the galaxy and the fate of the galaxy. And the reasoning is that he's the person with the intuition. He's one of those very rare resources in the galaxy that he can come up with the right decision, even if the data is insufficient or even misleading. So, how do you find these Golan Trevizes of the world? How do you find these priceless resources who can help you solve the problem, who can help you think differently, how you can improve yourself and you can scale the company? So I think those kinds of things, taking those metaphors and then figuring out how to apply them in real life, just making complex stuff easier, right? I think it's very important, and that's how we deal with the complexity in ISIRTIS also. The complexity of global organizations like Microsoft and Google and Accenture and Airbus, some of these large organizations in the world. How do you tackle the complexity of their problems? I think it's just breaking this down and applying some of these learnings from other worlds, applying these patterns that you much easily recognize because you're deep into a story or you're deep into sports, tennis or golf or the open source movement. And you take what you have already learned there and what you've recognized there as a pattern and apply that pattern in a more complex situation.
So what I'm also hearing, Monish, is that there is something that you need to leave at the subconscious level, where it's just probably lurking at the back of your mind, and you need to be able to make that connection as and when it becomes more obvious, and not try to force fit a connection as well, because you could very easily fall into that trap as well, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
Yeah. So at this point, I know that we love our quizzing. I know that you love to answer quiz questions. So I'm not going to let you go without taking shots at some of these quiz questions. So the first quiz question for you today. So there's this concept called as the game transfer phenomena, which is basically concept of people showing automatic behaviors linked to video game content, right? For example, seeing power bars over people's heads. But this was first described as an effect named after a game where people saw colored moving images when they fell asleep. So which game was this effect named after?
Pac-Man, most likely.
Not Pac-Man, colored moving images.
Colored moving images.
Think of the other more
Space invaders
landmark.
might be there. I still see those rockets going all over the place when I sleep. So, they're colored.
Yeah, but geometric shapes. Let me make it easier. Yeah.
Geometric shapes.
And a landmark game. It's probably the one of the most famous games.
Ever, huh?
Yeah.
That's the one on the Sega?
I think yes, yeah.
Yeah. Mario, Super Mario?
Not Mario, this is Tetris.
Oh, Tetris. Okay.
Yeah.
I should have got that.
Correct. Yeah. So this is the Tetris effect. So have you also suffered from that?
Not Tetris. Actually, I play Tetris on nowadays, especially in the last year or so, on the Oculus Quest, which is a completely different experience in terms of playing Tetris. But I've seen Space Invaders and maybe Super Mario a little bit in my dreams, spots over my eyes, but not Tetris. I think Tetris has always made me think structure. It doesn't last long, right? So
right,
structure and patterns. So
correct.
Yeah, very persistent.
Yeah, people have been known to have seen these images just before going to sleep over their eyelids and all. So that's when it was actually called the Tetris effect. And then later they realized that this was a much widespread phenomenon affecting people who were following all possible games, not just Tetris.
No, I'm ashamed of myself. I should have got that, especially you say it was an effect, right? The effect is well known. So.
Yeah. No, we'll let you take another shot at another question later in this. And
I hope there's a prize.
Oh, yes, then there'll definitely be a prize for this. Monish, let's move to the next section that I wanted to talk to you about, which is around the organizational culture and values at ISIRTIS. So I know for a fact that at ISIRTIS, you've been very particular about the organizational values on which you build a company, right? So but when and how did you realize the importance of identifying these values and living them? Was it like a gradual realization, or was there a trigger which made you go, aha, saying, no, this is what I need if I want to build an enduring organization? How did that happen to start
Yeah,
with?
that's a very good question. I think it took me maybe 30 years to realize that. Idiot me. But this is, as you probably know, this is my seventh startup. And whenever we have done that, subconsciously we have had, I've always had my own values, as everyone does. You have your personal values, you have your organizational values, company values, and so on. How do you project them and make sure that you use them as building blocks of your company was only when we actually started thinking about Icertis. And that was 11 years ago. I think when Samir and I came together, it was, hey, we have learned all these lessons. Now, if we have to build something lasting, which ones are the ones that we should take to heart? And I think the values popped up there when we were having the inception discussions of Icertis. This was really a thought out thing as opposed to realizing in the middle of your journey that your company actually needs to have those values built in from the ground up. And I think that realization came over a period of time. It was not an aha moment. It was a moment which said, hey, when you think about building a lasting organization, a substantial organization, then what are the foundation stones? There are people, of course. There are values. I think they're very critical. And then you think about what you do and how you make money and how do you make customers and how do you make them happy and so on. All that follows. But there are these two or three pillars of an enduring organization that you have to think about. So that's what happened with us. I think it was at the inception of the company that we thought, hey, this is what we will actually start with and believe in. We gave it shape a little bit later, which was different, but the concept was there right at the beginning of the inception of ISIRTIS.
And you spoke about how you and Samir actually got together and thought about this. So when you started thinking about this, how did you zero down on Forte as the set of values that you want to actually build the organization on?
Yeah, yeah. And that's another very good question because I think when we said we both agreed on having values as a foundation and a way to work and a way to live, we also thought that as we started growing, how do we make sure that this is really enduring? The whole idea that we have in mind, the values that we believe in, how do you make them identifiable with people? And a reminder to ourselves. So both of them actually go hand in hand. And that's how we said, okay, let us synthesize, let's put together all the words that are there that we believe in, that we strongly believe in, and let's see if some of these words actually find the essence or represent the essence of what we think are our values. Because again, it's very hard to quantify what values mean, right? Or to give them a name and so on. So we picked, the whole process was very interesting. We actually went through a process. We put all of these words on the board and we underlined stuff and then we removed those underlines and underlined other words. And we said, hey, these are the words that are actually important to us. And that's how Forte happened. We thought fairness was extremely important. And fairness in everything, the way you hire, the way you work, you behave with people, the way you treat other people, the difference between throwing your visiting card in America on the table, and Samir gives this very good example. You go to Japan, it's a bow, and that's how you present your business card. Nowadays, with COVID, you probably don't have too much opportunity anymore. But it's how do you respect those completely different cultures as well? So starting from there to openness, where how open you are with your colleagues, your the whole Icertian family, how do you make sure that openness extends to your customers, your partners, and how do you make sure you measure that? Because it's very hard, right? And then respect, teamwork, and execution. I think those are, yeah, this is motherhood and apple pie, but it's very critical to make sure that motherhood and apple pie is something that you imbibe in your everyday work and everyday life. And that's how Forte actually happened.
So was this before you actually even zeroed down on the product? Was this before that, after that, and how long did that process actually take you? And was it just the two of you? Just if you can walk me through that, it'll be more concrete.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, so the ideas of the values and what we agreed on when we had our conversations, Samir and I, was even before the inception of ISIRTIS, when we were thinking of doing something next. And that's, I remember having these deep conversations in one of the coffee shops on Ferguson College Road and saying, hey, how do I actually think about a company? What does it mean to me? How do I think about behaving with each other and my co-founder? And how do I build that trust? And what do I do? So all of that actually happened before the inception of the company. But Forte actually came in the name, the putting words to your thoughts and principles actually came in about 2.5, 3 years down the line. And the process was actually very simple. We said, hey, now we are more than 50 people. We probably will not be able to keep in touch with everybody, especially with Samir in the US, me in Pune. And this team heavily, in the early stages, was heavily tilted towards India. Even today it is. And how do you, if you're losing touch with people at that level, at the family level and so on, how do you make sure that you can articulate your values well for the people now that you will hire going forward, and where people who are now working with you will hire them? So now it's already one level distanced.
Right.
So that's where we started thinking. It took us 2 days. I remember 4 hour sessions, 2 days. We did that whole underline exercise, put the word cloud in there, figure it out. It was Samir and I and our HR lead, head of HR at that time, Sulekha, who the three of us looked at it and said, hey, what do these words mean? And how do these words, how can they be articulated? And I remember I had a customer call. So I said, you guys, I leave it to you. I'll walk out of the room, take care of it. And I walked out of the room, I come back and they already have Forte on the board. I look at it, I say, I love it.
They held the fort and gave you the forte, is it?
I'm going to use that.
Nice, nice. So yeah, so this is really fantastic, Monish. I'm just listening to this story. And if I were to ask you, is there a right time for other founders of when they should be doing this? I actually asked this question to Pranali, who was on this Smartcast earlier, because the reason why I asked this is some people they understand the importance of it, but they sometimes feel it is so important and so valuable that we want to do it exactly right. And right now is not the time where I can devote that much time to it. So I want to do it right. So I'm going to push it ahead, and it just keeps getting pushed down the road. So Pranali was very clear that it has to be done right at the beginning. Do you have any nuance, or how would you look at this with founders also worrying about existential issues, right? Like product market fit to start with. How does that fit in?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly hard question to answer because every situation is different, right?
Correct.
And it's also about see even like basic stuff, right? What is the if you ask most founders, if you had asked me 20 years ago, Monish, you're starting this new startup, what's your objective, right? My answer would have been, hey, I want to do $20 million,
Right.
or I want to get acquired, or I want to be a unicorn, or I want to do the best HR software that is. Those would be the answers that I would have given you. With Icertis, my answer day one and Sameer's answer day one was very different. We were actually, in our initial conversations when we started, we were not thinking of product market fit. We were not thinking of product at all. We were not thinking of revenue. We were thinking, can we build a substantial and consequential company? Now, that thought process, not many founders, including me, start with. It's only when you've actually done 4 or 5 startups and
Correct.
now you're thinking about this in that different way. So I would say, I don't think it is as important to articulate your values and define your culture when you are about 50 people and 50 people is just a benchmark. Take it with a pinch of salt. Where you have so much intimate connect and where you're driving people every day and they are driving you and you're working with them 18 hours a day, that culture and values is not far away, right? And that culture and values is driven usually by the founders. I mean, 99.999% of that is driven by the founders in the initial stages, as we all know. So that doesn't need articulation, that doesn't need putting on the wall. It is nice if you can do, but I don't think it is essential. I think that those values, any startup at around 25, 30, 40, 50 people, if you ask them, they'll tell you what their culture is. They can explain anyone in the organization, right? It's open. Can I go to Monish? Is it fair? Are the work hours being fair to us? Whatever that means, whatever openness means for you, respect means for you, customer satisfaction means for you. People have different things as part of their values as well. These are words to describe what those values are, but they never adequately cover that. But in a 50 people company, generally everybody will know and will be very close, right? And a company will thrive if that comes together. It won't thrive if it doesn't come together, primarily because there are too much friction between people, and that doesn't bode well for a product and for a fledgling company. But as you grow bigger, I think this definitely becomes very important. That's when you start about to market it, right? In the true sense of the word, it is actually marketing, because you have to market it to yourself. You have to see it every day. You have to internalize it every day and remember that, hey, this is where we really want to do.
Yeah. So before I ask you the next question, I'm going to ask you a quiz question first, because I think it's a nice segue to the next question that I have. So this is from the world of Bollywood, right? So this Bollywood actor prepared for a certain role by reading a book called Abhishapt Chambal. Okay, and this book was written by Tarun Kumar Bhaduri. So what role was he preparing for?
Chambal means probably but he was preparing for it. It's interesting. I would have said Fulan Devi, but then I would be wrong.
So you're on the right track. You've got I've thrown in two clues there. You've picked the scent of the main clue. The second clue is the name of the author. It's Tarun Kumar Bhaduri, right?
Yeah.
So that's the second clue there.
And you got some hard questions for me. The CSI quiz I remember many years ago was much easier. It was at least software.
Yeah, so Tarun Kumar Bhaduri's daughter acted in this movie. How many Bhaduri actresses
I know
do you
Jaya
know?
Bhaduri. I
Right.
made a collect connection. I could even go to Rita Bhaduri if I had to.
No, but it's not Rita Bhaduri, it is Jaya Bhaduri.
I know it's Jaya
So,
Bhaduri. So,
Jaya Bhaduri and Chambal and dacoits, come on.
ah,
And I'm asking you this question.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Ha. No, I give up. I give up. I cannot remember.
A landmark role, one of the most famous roles in Bollywood history.
In history. So it's an older movie, of course.
Okay, I'll give you a date, August 15th,
Oh my goodness.
1975.
You decided to completely shame me. Saath Hindustani or something.
Not Saath Hindustani, but yeah. So this is Amjad Khan preparing for the most iconic role.
Really? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Now you're really kicking yourself. I'm
Really?
sure.
I should have got this.
Yes, you should have got this.
I didn't know it was actually based on a book, and the
No,
actor prepared from a book.
yeah. So Amjad Khan actually read this book about the dacoits of Chambal, and that's how he prepared for the role of Gabbar Singh. And it's just coincidental that it was written by Jaya Bhaduri's father, and she also acted in it. And the reason why I picked this question was because we know how much of devotion you and Samir have for the film Sholay. And my next question was actually going to be about how do you ensure the larger team understand what living these values really means. And the reason why I picked this was because I remember we did a session on Forte based on Sholay, which is probably the most interesting way of actually conveying those values to the whole organization. So, yeah, what else do you do besides doing these fun events like based on Sholay?
Yeah. See, that's where you got me. And now I'm analyzing this. I think you're asking me two simple questions. You would ask me such simple questions. So now I remember. Now I get it. Okay. So this is good. And actually, that was one of the things, right? How do you, again, it is about how do you simplify things, right? How do you make it simpler for you and the people you work with? And values and culture is a very complex conversation. You can live them, But it's a very complex conversation to explain when people are new. So we do all of the, I would say, traditional, normal stuff, onboarding. We have Forte interviews as part of our HR process. We do during onboarding, we have share videos, we share anecdotes of where we, and most of the anecdotes are actually not how we lived our values or live our values, but how we missed living our values. What are the situations? So that actually is a very good way of thinking about, oh, this is actually wrong. And that's a better lesson in my mind. And I think the other thing we do is this is imitation. It's automatic motor responses. It's a little bit, I'll go on a limb here. It's a little bit like religion, right? You think about religion and you think about all the rituals and the power of God and the fear of God. And it's always targeted to imbibe a sense of values, right? If you do this, then this is going to happen. If you do this, this is going to happen. And this is the way to live life. And I think one of the things that religion does is repeat, repeat. And I think values and culture also come to fore and become part of your life because of that repetition. So Samir and I never ever forget an opportunity to bring up our values to the point where people say, "Oh my God, not again!" Right? You know what I mean? Every conversation, every meeting, even customer conversations, right? We start with the slide, which is, hey, here's our mission, vision, and values. And we talk about them. And I think that repetition really helps. I think it does. You have to be reminded of them constantly. And it's not other people, it's for you as well.
Correct.
So what happens, the result of that is actually very interesting. People always say, hey, you have to remember your values when you're in a bad situation, right? And I say that is when you forget them, which means that you have to not remember values, but that reaction in that bad situation has to be automatic.
Right.
Now, how does that become automatic? Make sure that when you're not in a difficult situation, keep repeating.
Right.
Hey, this is how you behave. This is what is really important for you. And I think that your actions, when they are automatic, and those automatic actions are governed by your values, that is when you can say that you're living your values.
Correct. Yeah, in fact, we actually did one recording, an interview with an Indian Army veteran. And I posed this question to him about how does this work with the Indian Army? And he said the same thing. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed. It's very similar what you're talking about. And it's also about building that whole mythology around it. Again, going back to the religion context here, the way we would have been taught as children about what are the right values to live by and why should you do that is through all these stories that we have read in. If you take the case of Hinduism, it's all the Vedas, Puranas, Panchatantra. Those are the stories which talk about how you live a good life, and that's what you want to do. Automatically those things get imprinted in the child's brain. I guess that's what you're referring to here with that repetition.
Absolutely. And it's also, you have these stories, these anecdotes, the relationship to Sholay, the metaphors to simplify things. I think that's how you imbibe that, even in people who you've never met, right? 400, 500 people we hired without no Icertian meeting them.
Correct.
And they became Icertians and they embrace that culture just because of this, in my mind at least, this repetition and knowing that this is important to the company.
Yeah. Slightly different kind of a question. You mentioned the cases where you actually missed. So, are there any concrete examples that you can share where Forte made you take a slightly unpleasant decision in terms of, say, letting go of someone and probably not even letting that person join because you thought there was a misfit of values there? But you were tempted that no, this person is really skilled, but no, I know that this person is not fitting into my values. Was there a situation like that?
Many. So actually, it is very interesting. And this is something that we've actually analyzed. In the last stages of an interview, you lose about 7 to 10%, depending on geography, of people where you don't feel that there is a fit. So everything's gone well. This is like the last one or two interviews where you're like really looking at fit. So you're actually discovering that fit. And you say, no, this probably doesn't work, right? So 7 to 8%, 10% in the conditions that we are in, hiring conditions we are in, the talent that you find, and the growth we are in. So the speed at which we want to hire is actually a fairly large number. But it happens all the time. It happens all the time. And it's not that the values of that person are bad or anything.
Right.
Just that they are so different that you immediately realize that this is not going to fit. So we do two things. We used to, obviously, like any other founder, we used to interview, both Samir and I used to interview everyone who came into the organization. Now we've raised that bar a little bit in terms of at what level we talk to people. So after a certain level, everyone talks to usually both of us, but at least one of us. And one of the things usually we do is it's not an interview to find out, unless they are a direct report, it's not an interview to find out capability.
Right.
It's an interview to find out that fit. And there's lots of examples where we said no. And we were open enough to share that and say, hey, this thing doesn't match. So it's going to be very hard for us. And sometimes, very rarely, people have come back and said, oh, you know what you say is right, but here's what I meant. And here's how probably this fits in your parameters, right? Things like what you tell your customers, how you manage. When you ask people how you manage people, most people will say, I do this, I give incentives, I work closely with them, I meet them every week, I lead by example. And then you say, hey, what kind of examples? Sometimes those examples are not that great, right? Or they're not fair. And then you say, no, this doesn't fit very well. And I think that becomes an important thing for us to judge. Not just that, it also actually flows down. All of our execs after a certain level in ISIRTIS have a Forte bonus.
Okay.
Right? And some part of the variable is assigned completely and it's at the discretion of the skip level manager usually, right? So it becomes interesting. So most of the execs actually come to me and Samir in terms of determining the Forte bonus. Usually I defer to Samir because he usually sees people in action in a variety of situations. And it's complete discretion. Even in the offer letter, it's very clear that there is no argument here. Right. And it could be perception, it could be wrong, but it's there. And it's there because we want to we hear what other people are saying, what we are thinking of that person when it comes to these values. So obviously, as we grow, this is not a scalable example. This is not a good example because it gives power to individuals, which is not good as you expand. So we have to figure out a way of scaling this out and having a better way of measuring this. But this has actually helped us because every time somebody does not get the 100%, and most people do, but some don't, it leads to a very interesting conversation. Right. And that conversation is not about performance usually. That conversation is about behavior, right? And then in the spirit of openness, if somebody asks me a question, who told you this? We tell them who told us this. And then they have to figure it out, why that person said what he said or she said. And then they have to go back and check. I think it's such a healthy process that we have been able to correct a lot of empire building, politics, whatever you call it. As the organization grows, people get more and more conscious of how they build their organization, especially when they have power. This actually dissipates a lot of that. I think that will be, as we grow, that will be very critical for us to keep doing well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So as Ben Horowitz says, culture is not just something that you just write and forget about. It's a set of actions, right? Daily actions. And I think you've listed some very important and descriptive actions, I must say. Anyone who's listening to this can actually start using some of these things that you've talked about in their own organizations. I'm going to move to the next section here, Monish, and this is something which I'll be very interested if any listeners actually employ this in their organizations and teams, because it definitely comes out as something very daring, right? We have co-authored an article earlier where your biggest contribution was your photo.
What you're thinking about.
that you created and gave me. So that was about the whole idea of resilience and chaos monkeys, right? So you've actually, I've heard you speak about this, where you've talked about deliberately introducing chaos in your teams by taking away your key team players from time to time and get them to work on other projects, right? This sounds like a great idea. Again, you probably picked this from the software architecture model and actually put this into practice in real life. But how does your team take it? Yes, you have great intentions, it looks awesome, but how does your team take it? Both the stars who have been asked to go out of a project where they've probably contributed a lot in building, and those who are left to deal with the absence of those stars, right? How do both of those sets of people deal with that?
Yeah, no, and it's a very good question. But the trick here is that they don't always realize what has happened, right? So I think it is. So the way I've always done it is, and I love experiments and then validations, right? You try something new and you break the mold and you see what happens. You try 10 things, you find one which really works. This has really worked. And it's worked so well that I cannot remember an exception where it has not worked. It's that good, right? So when you take away the star, two things happen, right? Either people are resilient. By nature, humans are resilient, right? They'll figure out and you'll get new stars. That's the beauty of the whole thing. And in most cases, when you make these changes, you don't make these changes by saying, hey, I'm going to take your best person and I'm going to put some put them there. But what we say is, hey, here's a reorg, and the reorg is needed because we have, and it's true, right? I'm not faking it.
Right.
The reorg is needed because I need this particular person in a different position, and people are okay with that, right? And there's always a dip, and then you come back, but then you come back much stronger. I've tracked this because I've done it very deliberately, and I've tracked this, and it works, and it absolutely works.
And if you can give some concrete examples or anecdotes of the pain that happens, so that people can actually be ready to expect something. So what can possibly go wrong? You said there is a dip. So what does that mean? What does that dip really mean?
Yeah. So think about it like you're not doing this when you're setting sail from a port where the is very hard to navigate. And then in the middle of that navigation, you're not taking away the captain, right? That's not what you're doing.
Correct.
What you're doing is when the ship is on the high seas and a strong wind at the back, that's when you take away the captain. So the dip essentially happens when there's always a auto run period in any team where the team just continues to do what it's doing, goes through their scrums, goes through their next release. It's all been planned. The next, depending on what size of the team and what complexity, 4 to 6 weeks or 3 to 4 months, you don't see a direct effect. That's how you deal with downstream reactions like customers, right? You don't want your customers to be affected by your experimentation, right? But then when the next circle or cycle comes back, when you start planning, there are people who then, that's when the dip happens. That's when there's a period of who is going to take the lead? Who is going to do the job that was always done by this person who got removed? And then this always happens when pressure starts mounting, right? Not when it's business as usual. And that is when you see these people step up, right? That's when you see these new stars start to shine. And that's where you pick them up and say, okay, you lead this because you took that initiative already. And there are a couple of very interesting, one anecdote actually I can share is very interesting. We did that with a team. It was a small team, 10 people. And there was this one guy, and he was the one who actually held the team together. He was really good with people. He was the one who I thought made the team really productive and deliver more than expected. And we were doing really well with the team. And that's when I moved him into a pre-sales role, which was very interesting, right? Because I thought, and this was a technology role, obviously, working directly with me. And I moved him into a pre-sales role because we needed someone there at that level. So what happened was the effect was actually very immediate, right? Immediate in the sense that you could see that there was a void, because this was not, you didn't take away a star who was actually overperforming or performing well. Overperforming is probably a bad word, but you took away someone who was holding the team together. Okay. Now, that was an interesting problem to solve, because the dip was fairly heavy, because there was no one who could actually step up into a role of holding a 10 people team together. They could support one, two, three people. They couldn't support one individual in that team, couldn't support 10. And then I had to actually go back and actually get deeply embedded in that team to help them realize what they were missing. And it was an interesting experience, because then I had to tell them why I did this. Okay. And they said, "Oh, but you should have told us." And I said, "Yes, I should have told you. But if I had told you, then you would have lost the reason why we are having this conversation.
Right.
And then you would have reacted very differently." So I said, "I'm telling you now, because now you realized how important that person was in holding the team together, and what now you have to do to hold yourself together." I think that lesson and that whole thing actually was a big learning lesson for me, in terms of how to look at what kind of stars can you afford to take away. And I think it was a learning experience for the team, because they actually realized that when they dipped, why did they dip?
Right.
And the dip was usually more of infighting. So it was interesting. This guy didn't do his job, QA didn't do their job, and that kind of stuff. And I said, "Hey, you don't need other people to tell you. You don't need that person to tell you how to behave with your co-workers. Now you have to go grow up in his absence." And I think they did it very well after that. So I'm glad it worked at the end.
In fact, I recently read an article by a friend, Avnish Anand, who's also appeared on CTQ Smartcast. He wrote about glue guys. When you're talking about this, I think the term to be used here for that person is glue guy, the guy who actually is the glue for the whole team. I'll share that article with you later. It's a very nice read there. One sub question to that, Monish. You talked about these reorganization. It's in the spirit of experimentation, right? So, what other kinds of experiments that you do at work and with respect to org level design that you've tried and you've found them to be interesting experiments?
Yeah, I can share a couple which are very interesting. So one thing, and this is actually Samir, not me, when things are not working well, one function, one team, whatever, when there's one hot spot that you find where things are not working well. And I think what we do, basic principle is just change. Doesn't matter what change, just change the organization. Okay. And tell people that, hey, you are changing the organization, and get some suggestions. People will come from very different angles, and not the whole team, but the team leadership, and say, "Hey, I want to change this completely. What would you do?" And they come up with ideas. And as part of coming up with ideas, I think a new org takes shape. And then you go to the team and say, "Hey, here's what looks logical, right? And here's what we would love to do. And this is the reason why we would love to do." Sometimes there is no reason. We say, "Hey, just need change." And I think that works. Not always, but most of the times it works. But for that, you need two things. You need that elasticity in the organization where people are okay with that kind of change, because in most cases, organizational change leads to apprehension, right? And you don't want that emotion to come in. It will be, what is going to happen to my job, or what is going to happen to my career. It's going to be, hey, what is the new thing that's going to happen tomorrow? And that's a fine balance in terms of how you manage that. But we do that all the time, and people have got used to it now, and they know why we are doing this. And now it's gone down the line where managers are experimenting with this, and they're getting help from HR as a catalyst to figure out, hey, is this the right thing to do? They come to us and say, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking, here's the model. Can you see any holes in that thinking?" And that's worked very well. I think there's another experiment that I'm actually trying. It's in process, which I think is very interesting. I'd love to share that once it finishes. What I've done with my team, which is about a 40, 45 people team, so very small compared to our entire engineering. Uh, I've said, "Hey, end of the year, we want to promote X number of people." And that's limited, that's fixed. I'm going to promote so many people, or we are going to promote as a team so many people. And you have 2 votes, each one of you, every 2 months for the next 6 months. Yeah, so 3. So you have 6 votes in all. For you to choose, give the votes to anyone you think deserves to be promoted. Okay. And we said there's only one parameter. The parameter is that if you use your vote to say Monish should be promoted, then Monish should already be playing the role that he should be promoted to. Right? That's the only. So it doesn't matter what the role is, what level it is, and so on. We just want these X number of people in a 40 people team. Let's say 4 people, 10%, or actually 20%. So 8 people, let's say. So we want to promote 8 people, right? From the lead to the junior most person in that team, right? The number is fixed, not at what level. So use your votes carefully. You can vote for yourself and make sure that you actually vote for a person who is already playing the role. That's the only way. And it's actually worked very well. And these are anonymous votes, but people are actually proactive and they come back and say, I voted for this person. And I didn't vote for this person. And I didn't vote for myself. And it's been a revelation because so far, I think we have gone through one cycle. Let's see what happens when we go through all the 3 cycles. So far, the results of that first poll have been exactly what I would have done.
Okay.
And I'm thinking that if this succeeds and if I can roll it out across ISIRTIS, the manager's big conundrum at the end of a appraisal cycle of who to promote just goes away.
Right.
And the bad effects of why was he promoted, why was this guy not promoted, why was I not promoted, just goes away. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Let's see. So that's the kind of, and this is a certain kind of chaos because the first reaction was, no, we are not going to vote. Impossible. Monish, this is a really crappy idea.
Correct. I can imagine.
And I said, yeah, it is. I know it's a very crappy idea, but bear with me.
Correct.
And if you think this is all wasted exercise, just revert to at the end of the year, just revert to our old system.
Right.
Use it, make it fun. And I thought I would get 30-40% reaction. We've got 98% voting.
Okay. Great.
And 2 people probably because all this pandemic is not allowed to vote or something. But it's incredible. It's incredible. And people are loving it.
Looks definitely very promising. I would like to hear the results of this at the end of the 6 months and see if and how you actually roll it out to other teams as well. That will be a very interesting experiment to watch out for.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yes. All right, Manish. So that brings us to the last section, which is going to be a short one, where I'm going to ask you for no quiz question anymore, but I'm going to ask you for your hot takes. So what are the 3 apps that you can't live without?
It's become truly, I think it has become very hard nowadays. I keep switching between stuff. And I have this iPhone feature where I swap apps. If they're no longer used, they just go away and you have to install. And I think because Google Maps, etc., I've not used. I think it's Tripit, for example, that was one of my go-to apps. I think it's now Drink Water. So that's one I use absolutely regularly. I use now, I realize now I need reminders for meetings. So I have Siri wake me up at this time 10 times a day.
Right.
So I'm not asleep in between. It's it's not an app, but it's just a discipline. And then I think apart from Outlook, obviously the regular one, that's one, it's not an app, it's a game. A friend of mine, a company called Super Gaming, very exciting company, they released a beta game called Amongst Us, which is actually a take on a really famous Devil Amongst Us. Oh my goodness, that's so much fun. That is incredible fun.
Oh, great. My son is going to love this when I tell him that you are a big fan of this game.
Oh, he is?
Among Us and Amongst Us, it's the same, right? Among Us is what he
okay, it's the same. Right. So the original game was Devil Amongst Us. It's a classic, old time, many years, decades old game. And this is a take on that. And it's so much fun.
So which game would you have loved to create?
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's a hard one. So maybe Gods of War or God of War rather. I think primarily because the visuals and the puzzles and the mechanics of the game are really stunning. Especially now in 4K on the Xbox Series X. It's a phenomenal game to play.
Okay.
So actually, I'm actually confused. I think it's probably the PS5, not the Xbox. Yeah, the PS5. And I think the other one I would have loved, but I'm not creative enough, so I know I'll never be able to do it, is the Ghost of Tsushima. It's just stunning imagery, just stunning. And I've spent hours and hours just not playing, it's just wandering the world. It's just beautiful. So some of these games are really interesting. There's another called Lightsaber on the Oculus Quest, which is actually a very good workout game. If you think about it, it's a lot of fun. You play with lightsabers with blocks your way in 3D, and then you the ninja stuff.
Right.
So you cut those blocks in one, and you have a red sword and a blue sword, and you have to
Hmm.
cut the right blocks with the right color.
Right.
It's that actually would be something great to build. I think it's lots of mathematics and mechanics and just some simple, stunning gameplay. That was a tough question actually.
All right. Next one. What do you think is the future relevance of HR?
In an ideal world, you don't need HR, right? So the future relevance of HR in my mind actually becomes very interesting. It is the objective is to make themselves redundant,
Right.
which is hard. It's like customer support, right? You talk about it, you want to make it redundant, but it's almost impossible.
Hmm.
And it's also how do you catalyze, especially in the potential new normal where we'll have more satellite offices, much smaller offices than these big ones in the center of the city. These spread out offices will make HR's job and relevance both actually very interesting, right? Because now most of it is going to be remote, most of it is going to be online, most of it is, hey, when HR comes visiting to town, right? It's usually used to be like CEO comes visiting to town.
Right.
It's like, hey, HR is in our office today. So I think it's actually, in my mind, it is the challenge of the next, if I may say so, the decade.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where does HR go from here, right? In the new normal. And people are talking about going back to the office and hybrid work and so on and so forth. I firmly believe that the 1.5 years that have gone, whatever that time for many people around the world, I think we've fundamentally changed. I
Right.
don't think we can just go back to going to work in the
Hmm.
office.
Hmm.
Just think about this as something that never happened.
Right.
I think most people don't, but I'm also convinced that is true. So now you have to have this balance of people working from home on a regular basis or a permanent basis or even not having any offices, which many companies, not percentage wise, but many companies in numbers have tried for many years and done this successfully for many
Hmm.
years.
Hmm.
And there, what happens is now HR becomes more of how do you design your workspaces and policies and your environments and your screens, what. So one thing, and this is just a slight divergence,
Hmm.
but or diversion, I would take it, but it's very useful to think about it that way. So we've always done these screensavers,
Hmm.
right, for many years. So every domain joined laptop gets its own screensaver, and the screensaver shows Forte, it shows something, who won an award, things like that, right? We're using those channels now to do a lot more deeper messaging.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is HR doing
Right.
this,
Hmm.
thinking about this and owning this and driving this and saying, hey, how do I drive these messages when you open up your laptop every day after in the afternoon? Whenever you pick up work, the first thing is the screensaver. How do you give out these subtle messages that make you feel more comfortable, that cheer you up? So it is not now about only showing philosophy and values and news. It is about making you smile. And that transformation to HR being a more people and high touch
Hmm.
oriented
Hmm.
role to more technology oriented, introducing mobile apps for many things, introducing no code platforms to do your own stuff. I think it's going to go a long way in defining, redefining, changing the role of HR and the relevance of HR in the future. I think these are the things, again, where experimentations become very important. You have
Right.
to figure out what works well and then double down on what works well and leave everything aside. I think HR is going through that big transformation in my mind right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agreed on that, Manish. So we started this with a question on gaming. So I'm going to end with related but different. So what is the future relevance of football as a sport, especially given the whole economics around it and the ESL issue and all of that? What is your take on the future relevance of football?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you mentioned ESL, otherwise I would have thought about American football as well.
I'm talking about the real football.
Exactly. It's not good. I think no, it's a good question. I think it's the sign of the times. Money, entertainment, what has happened to cricket, I think to a certain extent. What's happened to Formula One, by the way,
Right.
right? Very interesting, is also happening to football. I think it's such a great sport. It will survive. It'll enhance itself. It'll become a better sport out of all this. But it is going to have its ups and downs in my mind. I think it is that popularity is not going to go away. It's such a great sport and just part of so many cultures around the world that it's. I think it's built for resilience in my mind, right? But all of the stuff that is happening today and some of the interesting stuff, the Euro Cup is actually a very good revelation. It's extremely interesting, and the way different parts of the world have taken to enjoying that in different ways is very interesting. But I think I don't read too much in it as it happens. I think it's a great sport. It just remain great. It'll just survive all of the stuff that happens. What is happening in India, which will be very interesting. I think a lot of other sports are taking a backseat in my mind to football,
Mm-hmm.
in general, which means I think the next decade could probably see us in the World Cup.
Yeah. Hope to see that happening. Fingers crossed and touch wood, everything. We've been, I think, since 1950, we haven't had a great time performance wise. We've had, some great players over the years. But I think it's probably high time now that, this team actually starts putting together the performances that we know we can expect from these people. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's just that the time and place and serendipity
correct,
that
correct.
comes in. I think it just needs one catalyst to
Right.
make it all come together.
Yeah.
I think the talent is there, the opportunity is there, definitely the money is there.
Yes.
I think all they need is that one catalyst.
Right.
So yes, fingers, toes, everything.
All right, Monish, I think that was a fantastic conversation and probably the last answer summed up multiple threads that we spoke about resilience, catalyst, serendipity, the right time for an idea. It sums up the entire conversation for me. As usual, lots and lots to learn from anybody who watches this. I'm sure should probably sit down with a notepad of what all to actually follow from this. Thanks a lot, Monish.
No, absolutely. My pleasure. I think the questions you ask always make me think, which makes it really exciting. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, take care.